Dr. Bruce Deel is a great friend, and I don't know anybody that I know that has done more to help people than Bruce Deel. I really don't. I say it from the bottom of my heart. 25 years ago, next Saturday, he moved his family into 14th. How many of you from Atlanta? Into 14th Street, in an old building up there, old church, wasn't it? And he and his wife and 4 daughters, right? 5 blonde-headed daughters right there in the middle of the worst part of, he thought at the time, town, and stayed there for several years. And then God just gave him a vision, and he built City of Refuge. City of Refuge is, I don't know how many of you ever been there, but I'm going to tell you something. It is the worst location in the city of Atlanta, maybe in the South. It is right in the middle of the drug-infested, alcohol. One of his counselors was murdered as she left work one night. And he's been living there with his kids, and it's just amazing what he's done and all the lives he's changed. He just told me that he's graduated over 200 auto mechanics in the year. But I got to tell you about this. They just did taught an IT class, right? A cybersecurity class. 10 people in it. 18 people in it. Now listen, these were people that were living on the street. 18 people in it. Wow. The lowest salary when they got through, the lowest salary, he got $73,000, wow. And the highest was $117,000. Wow. Just straight off the street, and that's what they do. That's what they do. He's also going to tell you about his daughter and the fact that they have a home for just trafficked young ladies and girls, and it's just an amazing story. So I want you to write this down. Write this down. If you don't have a pen, get one. Trust first. 2 words. Trust first. That's the name of his book. And if you don't get it, shame on you. It tells that whole story. Trust First. It's a great book, great read. And I'm proud to say he's my brother in the Lord. We worked a lot of trace theses together. I love he and Rhonda and their family. Bruce, come up here and share what you want to with us.
All right, thank you, Jack. I love Jack. We've been friends for a long time and worked a lot of spiritual retreats together. And I learned something new from him every time we're together. We're honored to be with you tonight. So thanks so much to the president for inviting us and others to be a part of that and for bestowing the honor on us. We're humbled by that and excited to be a part of the evening. Just going to share a little story with you and see what God says to you and to me about what we do with that story. Had the good fortune of growing up in the mountains of Virginia. My dad was a pastor. I grew up in a pretty legalistic environment. My dad got saved when he got out of the military, young man, 21 years of age, went to a little church in Conkerstown, West Virginia, accepted the Lord and called to ministry and a lot of rules and regulations. So he went into pastoral work, and everything was a sin when I was growing up. I was 13, my brother was 12. I said, "We're going to hell, ain't nothing we can do about it." Right? So anyway, started to figure out grace along the way, and so I graduated high school and went off to Lee University, where we graduated, went into ministry. And I started to reflect on my life a few years ago, and I realized that the reason we are where we are today is just because of a series of events and activities where we said yes each time we were presented with an invitation or a question. So it's simply just the power of yes. And so as a senior in high school, I went to a youth rally, and I remember kneeling down on the left side of the sanctuary and committed my life to Christ and accepted the call to ministry. And so then I went to college and accepted the call to go through training and the disciplines necessary to go to work. I got invited to my first pastoral youth pastor assignment. We said yes to that. And along the way, I talked Rhonda into saying yes to me. And so that was the best yes she's ever made. But anyway, it did take me 7 years to get her to say yes. She said no a lot before she said yes. But I finally said yes. I wouldn't give up. And so she said yes. We went into ministry. And we started having little girls. So we have 5 daughters: Cassie, Kelsey, Kenzie, Kayla, and Carly. That's why I look like this. But so went into ministry, started having little girls. We had 4 girls in 6 years. And I'd been in ministry 14 years, and life was good. It was fine. Right? I was a youth pastor. I was associate pastor. I was traveling and speaking. We were leading mission trips overseas, and people were coming to know the Lord and being discipled, and it was all fine. But for me, it was just fine, right? It was good, and I knew that we were doing good work, but we would get in a car after service, and I would just look around and I go, is this it? Right? Is this all there is for us? If it is, then if the Lord would just tell me this is it, then I can settle in. But there's just some sense of stirring to me that there's something else we're supposed to do. And so 25 years ago, the bishop of our organization asked me, we've been leading youth groups and singles groups downtown to a little church in Atlanta where we were helping them with a food pantry and some clothing closets and just doing some things. And the bishop called and asked to meet with my senior pastor, myself, and he said, hey, the little church downtown, the pastor's been gone about 6 months. They're down to just a few folks. They don't have any money. The building's in disrepair, and we wonder, Daryl, my senior pastor, if you would loan Bruce downtown for 6 months, and we think you probably should close the church and sell the property. And so we talked about it. So well, this will be fine, right? It's something different. I get to speak every Sunday and develop some more business acumen as I wrap up all the things to sell the property and help these people find somewhere to go to church, right? And so Rhonda said, have fun. We'll see when we get home. So we go down, and our story is our 5th or 6th Sunday. This young lady walked in the back door, and she looked pretty rough and sort of stood out in the crowd. And at the end of service, she just walked down the aisle, and she was weeping. And she took me by the hands, and these were her words. She said, I've been hooking and stripping 14 years. Can you help me get out of the life? And we just said yes. We didn't know what that meant. We'd never rescued anybody from trafficking. We'd never gone and done some of the things we found ourselves doing that week. But we just knew that we were supposed to say yes, so we did. And so she showed back up the next Sunday, and she brought Bill with her. He was a 52-year-old alcoholic that said he hadn't been in church in 30 years and was one of her paying customers. And during the week, she said, I found something I think you need. Will you come go to church with me? And he said, yes. And so they came and they sat on the second row. Bill was sitting on the end by the aisle. And we started singing that little chorus, I need you more than yesterday, more than words can say. And we sang for a couple times, couple minutes, and Bill literally fell out of his chair in the center aisle and started wailing and weeping out loud, wouldn't stop. All right? So finally I got the music quiet, and I go down and I go, can I help you? And he goes, well, I think I need Jesus. And I said, well, we usually do that at the end of service. We got a plan, and I need to invite you. He goes, no, I want him now. And I'm like, all right, fine. Right? So Bill accepts the Lord. So the next Sunday we walk in, there are 4 more homeless people, drug addicts, and alcoholics. And the next Sunday we walk in, and there are 10 more. And the next Sunday there are 20 more. Wow. And we walk in about 4 months into a 6-month assignment, and there are 100 drug addicts, alcoholics, homeless folks have invited each other to church and are looking at us going, can you help us? And so I looked at Rhonda, and I drew on my deep theological seminary training, and I said, we've been conned by God. This is not right. Right? I grew up in the mountains of Virginia. Everybody knew this church up in the mountains of Virginia that I was supposed to go back pastor for 30 years. It's 500 mountain folk. I'm kin to 100 of them. And I was supposed to go back and kiss babies and bury the dead and do weddings and hunt and fish and eat fried chicken, chocolate pie, and watch Andy Griffith 2 hours every day. I knew what I was supposed to do. And now God's saying, you want to move in the hood for the rest of your life? And we said yes. Right? It wasn't part of our plan. We just said yes. And so we resigned our position and started pastoring this little church, and I started City Refuge immediately because I knew what we were going to do wasn't going to look like church in the normal sense of the word. And so we started pastoring, we started these outreach programs, and crazy stuff started happening, just incredible miracles, and we were just amazed. And Rhonda called me out of her quiet time one morning. She'd been in prayer and conversation with the Lord, and she called me. I was at the office downtown, and she was weeping. We were still living in the suburbs. And she was crying, and I said, "What's wrong, baby?" And she said, "You know, if we're really going to impact the city, we got to go to the city." She said, "If we want people in crisis to trust us, we have to live among them and show them that we trust them." And I said, "I hate when you talk to God." And so we did. We started looking around, and we were missionaries. We didn't have any money. The church didn't have any money. So the neighborhoods we wanted to live in, we couldn't afford. Neighborhoods we could afford, we're like, I don't know about that, you know. And so one day I just sort of said to Rhonda, I said, you know, the third floor, she'd already heard from Holy Spirit. I didn't know. I said, the third floor of this old 65-year-old church building is empty. And she said, well, let's move in. Wow. And so we moved in. And strangest thing when they build churches, they don't put bathtubs in them. I can't figure it out. So for the first 6 months, my girls took a bath in a number 2 wash tub. We'd fill up with a green water hose. And it's just hilarious. The first night we lived there, an addict tried to steal the vehicle, but he was so high, hot-wired the windshield wiper motor. So I came out the next morning, the car's still there, and the wipers are going like that. So it's going to be a hoot right here. We had a baptismal pool at the back of the sanctuary, and the first time we were going to have baptism, you had to crawl under the sanctuary, under the stage to turn on the water. So I was climbing under the stage, and there's a homeless guy living under the stage in the sanctuary by the baptismal pool. He's got a full bedroll, hot plate, radio. And I'm like, scoot over, buddy. I got to turn on the water. So we just started loving on people, and God started doing crazy stuff. Our 5th daughter was born while we lived there. I told Rhonda we moved in, let's live here a year, and we'll figure it out. We ended up living there 6 years. And 6 years we were broken into 34 times, and 3 vehicles stolen, and guns and knives and fist fights. And I've been in Superior Court with guys that tried to kill me. And it was just more fun than we'd ever had in church before. We weren't having any elders meetings about the color of the carpet, or the music's too loud, or contemporary versus traditional. We're like, you didn't get shot. We just show up on Sunday and go, you didn't get shot, I didn't get shot. Hallelujah. So we'd been there a while, and I looked around, and my congregation was this diverse racial mix and diverse background mix, and about half of them had been incarcerated, and we all got along, and we had a good time, and God was doing cool stuff, but I was still the white pastor from the suburbs, right? I mean, it was still, you could still feel it along the way. And so there was an incident one day where there was a physical altercation with me and another individual, and it was a fight, and the other individual didn't want to stop. Finally, Rhonda had to call the cops, and they show up, and so they show up and they asked what happened. We told them, and the police officer, she said, well, I don't know who's telling the truth, so we just have to arrest you both and let the judge figure it out. So they put the other individual in the car, and they write up my arrest warrant, and they're about to take me out, and Rhonda and the girls like, Daddy, going to jail. And so the day sergeant, the supervisor, pulls up, and he goes, what's going on? The officer told him, he said, well, we're not taking the preacher to jail. She goes, yeah, we are. I'm putting him under arrest. And so he said, well, Bruce, you're under arrest. We're going to release you on your own recognizance. We'll see you at 9 o'clock in the morning. Probable cause here, and we'll let the judge figure it out. It's like, okay. So I show up at court the next morning, 9 o'clock, and the judge throws a case out against me. But word got out in the street, right? So Jake, an old buddy of mine, he nicknamed me the Ghetto Rev 25 years ago. And then they dropped Rev, so in the hood they just called me Ghetto. So word got out in the street that Ghetto done been arrested. Right? So the next Sunday when I walk up on stage to preach, as I was walking up on stage, half my congregation stood up. get street cred was get arrested. I could have done that a long time ago. So now I try to get arrested every 3-4 years just to maintain. So I woke up one morning and some of y'all are like, is he ever going to talk about Jesus? But anyway, so I woke up one morning and I started counting. Ron and I started taking in little girls whose moms were going to jail or rehab. And when mom would get out, she didn't have anywhere to go. So she'd move in. So I woke up one morning and I started counting. Between my wife, our 5 daughters, the single moms and their daughters, I was living with 23 women. And I'm like, this is not good for me long term. So I called a real estate buddy. I said, hey, go over deeper in the Bluff and find me a building. Now, for those of you from Atlanta, the Bluff is 30314. Statistically, historically, highest crime rate in the state of Georgia, highest homeless population, highest number of HIV positive cases. More men and women in jail from our zip code in the state. 73% of our kids in a single parent household. 60% of all the murders that occur in metro Atlanta, 13 counties, 7 million population occur in our neighborhood. I said, that's where I want to build it. My real estate buddy came back. He said, I found 8 acres of land, 5 acres under roof, and 8-foot fence with razor wire and an armed guard together. I said, well, our dreams have come true. Go find out how much they want for that. He came back and said, the owner said he'll take $1,600,000. And my counter offer was, we don't have any money. And so I started sitting down with the owner and just telling him who we were, what we wanted to do. 6 months later, he donated 8 acres of land, 5 acres of land. So we move in this 210,000 square foot warehouse. 210,000 square foot warehouse. I asked the owner, will you give it to us? And you know what he ended up saying? Yes. Right? We just got this whole series of yeses in our life. Right? And so I started going to my friends asking for money, and they said yes. And then I asked more people for money, and we started building out, started doing the thing. And I had this idea, we got 210. I said, we got to create a one-stop shop for those in crisis. Yes. If you're coming out of incarceration or addiction or homelessness or domestic violence or sex trafficking, the road to recovery is really difficult. You got to go to 6 places. You got to go here for housing, here for education, here for mental health, here for vocation. You got to find child care. You got to find $95 to ride public transportation. And well-intentioned, good-hearted people just quit because they get worn out. Yes. And I said, what if all of that was in one place? Yes. Right? And you know the story in the Old Testament of the cities of refuge. 6 on the east side of the Jordan, 6 on the west side of the Jordan. When someone had shed blood, they would start running for their life. Right? If you do the historical evidence and do the historical study from the students, you'll find out there were students of law all along the way. And so if I'd shed blood, the next of kin could kill me and take my life if he got me before I got to the city of refuge. But if along the way, as I ran, and the scripture says everybody lived within 30 miles or a half day's journey of the city of refuge. So you're running for your life. The avenger of blood is chasing you. When you got to this, along the way, there were students of the law, and the students of the law, you would come to a river. They would have makeshift bridges. They would drop down so you could cross the river. And when the avenger of blood came along, they would hide the bridge. Now the avenger of blood had to figure out how to get across the river. You come to mountains, and they would have tunneled through that you could run through. You came to forks in the road, the avenger blood's chasing you. You come to the fork, the student of the law says go right, the avenger blood comes, they say they went left. You get to the city of refuge, you got to present your case to the high priest. And if they decided it was self-defense, manslaughter, now you could live inside the city for the rest of your life. Housing was provided, jobs were provided, food was provided. The avenger of blood could not enter the city. They could march back and forth outside the city. As long as you stayed inside the city, you were safe. If you left the city, the avenger of blood could take your life. Here's a really cool thing that happened. When the high priest of that city died, all sins were absolved. And now they were free to go, and the avenger of blood could no longer take their life. What I decided was, in those first 6 years, I saw men and women and sons and daughters running for their life. They were tired, they were weary, they were worn out, they were beat up, they were addicted, they were poor. And they couldn't find all the resources anywhere. And I said, we got to build a city of refuge. I know the Avenger of Blood's chasing them, but I know God's going to bring them here. Amen. And when they get here, we're going to provide food and clothing and shelter and addiction recovery and medical and mental health and dental and vocational training. And we're going to build apartments across the street they can live in for the rest of their life if they need to. We're going to do what's necessary. And the most important thing we're going to do is we're going to announce to them that the high priest has died once and for all. Yeah. And the Avenger of Blood can never take it. And so I said, we're going to build a one-stop shop. I went to every major funder in Atlanta and I pitched the story, and every one of them said it's a bad idea. They said, you got to do one thing and do it really well. I said, my one thing is transformation. And for transformation to happen, we got to do all these other things. So we just scraped it together and built it out. Today on my campus, 200 individuals live day and night. Mothers that are homeless with their children in their own space set up based on their family size. Survivors of sex trafficking, 63 beds on campus now for those who've been sex trafficked and exploited. Private Christian school on campus, private daycare, medical clinic, 10,000 square foot, 6 medical exam rooms, dental, vision, mental health. Everything they need. Vocational training program that puts 500 people a year into the workforce now. All across Metro Atlanta. A re-entry program, a returning citizen program for those coming out of incarceration. We've trained over 125 men and 50 women coming out of prison with re-entry, reintegration, reconnection to their family skills. They'd start their vocational training their last quarter of incarceration. Within 2 weeks of being released, they have their OSHA certification, forklift certification, CDL license, go to work within 2 weeks of being released. We've had over 170 released. Over 170 been released thus far, with only 5 have reoffended, right? We just got invited 2 months ago by the Department of Corrections in Georgia to go into all 18 level 5 prisons in Georgia, toughest prisons in Georgia, to teach our skills. And listen to this, listen to how God works. We are training the lifers in the 18 toughest prisons in Georgia to become the facilitators of the curriculum and help those men and women who will eventually get out. Those who will never get out are now having a purpose to help those who will eventually get out. Opportunity after opportunity after opportunity presented itself. And all we knew how to do was say yes. I didn't know how to raise $15 million to build out a facility, but we did. I didn't know how to launch around the country now. We now have 10 locations, 4 in Georgia, 3 in Virginia, Chicago, and Baltimore, New Orleans. We're opening in St. Louis and Nashville over the 12 months. I didn't know how to do that, but we did. Right? I didn't know how to see 30,000 lives transform in the last 25 years. All I knew how to do was get up every morning, try to listen to what he has to say to me, and decide, like 1 Samuel 15, that obedience is better than sacrifice. I try to figure out that in John 14, when Jesus says, if you love me, just do what I say. If you love me, just say yes when I invite you on a journey. If you love me, just say yes when I invite you to go talk to this guy that's obviously convulsing because he's going through detox right now. If you love me, do this. If you love me, do that. I just figured out how to say yes. And so now, they invite me to speak at strategic planning conferences all over the country, to corporate and churches and all kind of stuff. And I don't really know how to put together a strategic plan, but it pays pretty well. So I go and just make up some stuff. It's just like works out well. They want me to help launch these kind of things. And listen, I'm wise enough to know what I don't know. What I know is when the Lord invites me, if I'll say yes, He's already provided the way and the resource for the way to be accomplished. That's right. 18 years later, we have this incredible light shining in the darkest community in our city. Right? 47-unit apartment complex across the street we built. We renovated a 31-unit hotel right up the street. That was one of only 2 African-American owned hotels in 1959 in Atlanta. That is now going to be 31 housing units for minority men coming out of incarceration, addiction, and homelessness, where they can live for up to 3 years. We own 14 pieces of property. I've got 14 families right now who, in the history of their families, have never owned their own house. And they're in the home ownership training program right now, going to own their own homes. Just because we said yes. 18 years later, all those donors and organizations and foundations that told me it was a bad idea 18 years ago now think it was a good idea. And the funny thing is, most of them think it was their idea. That's a whole nother deal. 8.5 years ago, I wrap up this, 8.5 years ago, we had to say yes again. And it was a hard yes. It's been a hard yes for the last 8.5 years. I was called by a friend of mine 8.5 years ago who said, we've just rescued a young lady from sex trafficking in Washington State. We're flying her across country. Will you take her? And I said, we don't run a survivor program. And he goes, we just need you to hide her. They're looking for her. And so we got her, brought her in, put her in one of our rooms on campus. Literally for 40 days, she wouldn't come out of her room. She's laying in the bed, covered in a blanket, looking at the wall. After about 40 days, she asked to see me. I take a couple of staff, we go in, and she says, I need you to take me to the courthouse and wipe away the fact I ever existed. You got to change my name, my social security number, my birth certificate. They'll find me, and they'll kill me. I'd never gone through the process of taking somebody to have their name and identity and everything changing, wiping away the fact they ever existed. But you know what I said?
Yes.
I said yes. Know what it meant? I went home and told Rhonda that night, we're no longer just going to pray about this or give somebody else money. We're going to build our own home for survivors. And so I just went out and started raising money. We raised $1 million. We built our first house on campus for survivors. We thought we were doing a 30 to 60 day triage environment. Somebody was rescued or escaped, they would come to us. We would help them detox. We would help them start to figure out their mental health challenges. We would check out their criminal background, start them on a path for that. Then we would refer them to great programs all around the country. Well, the problem is, 7 areas of care we think these individuals deserve and need. We can only find 700 beds in the country that provide the level of care. The FBI told me personally that over 100,000 Americans will be trafficked in our country this year. Not counting internationals brought in. There's 700 beds. So my daughter Kelsey said, do you want to build a second house? And you know what I said?
Yes.
Yeah. So we built a second house. And we filled it up. And we built a third house. And we built a fourth house. So now we have 48 beds on campus for adult survivors of trafficking, 17 and over. We have locations in West Georgia, in Bremen and Tallapoosa. We just opened about 6 weeks ago in Dallas, Texas. 3 weeks ago, we cut ribbon on a new space on campus, 12-bedroom house for 11 to 17-year-old female survivors of trafficking. We now have 91 beds around the country for those who have been sexually trafficked and exploited. We're a drop-off location for the Atlanta Police Department, GBI, FBI, Department of Homeland Security. There have been threats on my life, right? We have 24-hour armed security on our campus because PIPs are not nice people, right? And we've had to say yes over and over and over, and sometimes it's hard to say yes, isn't it? Right? So Crystal came to us, and Crystal was born into a satanic cult. And the way they funded their cult was by trafficking their daughters. So she was sold the first time when she was 5. And for the next 18 years, she was trafficked on a regular basis. She was 12 years old, they made sure she got pregnant. And within moments of her baby being born, they sacrificed her child. When she was 23 years old, they were set up camp in Alabama. She stole a truck, got to Atlanta. And they called me and said, we got maybe the worst case we've ever seen. Will you take her? Yes. Yes. For months, my office sits literally in the middle of these 48 beds of survivors, where my office is. 4 houses right around. For months every day, I walk out of my office at some point in the day to walk down the hallway. Crystal will be coming the other way. When she saw me coming, she'd put her eyes on the floor, turn her head away. I'd say, good morning. No response. I don't blame her. She's been abused and raped by men for 18 years. Her father, the first one, right? She can't stand me. But I just kept getting up every morning, and I'd hear the Lord say, are you going to be nice to her again today? And I'd say, yes. And after literally about a year, one Sunday morning in worship, I walked up on stage as worship was wrapping up, and I looked back at Crystal. She was sitting over here. I looked back, and there was just a little tiny crack in her armor. You could see just a little bit of softening. The next Sunday, worship was going on, and uninvited, she just stepped out in the aisle and walked down, knelt over here, and it was as horrible, painful crying as you've ever heard. The next week, I walked out of my office and turned to go down the hallway, and I happened to see Crystal, and her head went down, and I said, good morning. And she went, good morning, Pastor. Oh. It started on a daily basis. The head would come up. Good morning. And then one day I walked outside. I went down the steps and I didn't see her. She was to the right over here. As I went down, she initiated a conversation. Good morning, Pastor. How are you? Now we're getting somewhere. I got a buddy that runs a Christian dude ranch in Estes Park, Colorado. And he came to stay at our campus one day, and we just built out one of the new homes. And he was the first person to sleep in the survivor home before any of the women. The next morning went to breakfast, and he couldn't stop crying at breakfast. And I'm like, what's wrong with you? And he said, I couldn't sleep all night. He said, all night I stood against that big column in the Commons here, and I prayed for every woman who will ever live in this place. I prayed they would feel loved and cared for. They would come to know the Lord. And he said, I want to raise the money, and I want to host a group of survivors every summer at my ranch. It cost $100,000 for the week. He said, I'm going to raise it. And I said, let's go. So he raises the money to host them. I raise the money to fly them out, and you should see this. We got 50 women going through Hartsville Airport with TSA that have been abused, trafficked, hidden away. Some of them never been on an airplane. It's a hoot, I'm telling you right now. And we raise money. We take them to Horsetown to buy boots and jeans and Western shirts. And, man, it's just phenomenal. So the first year we sent them out, Crystal was in that group. And so they go out, and they're there Sunday through Thursday, flying home on Friday morning. And so on Thursday afternoon, I jumped on a plane in Atlanta, flew to Denver. Grabbed a car, drove up to Estes Park, went to the flower shop and bought dozens of roses. Went to the candy shop, bought a ton of candy. I had friends from California that are musicians fly in. In the dining hall at the ranch there, they set up with keyboards and they're singing. And I said, bring the girls in, the ladies in one at a time into the dining hall. And as they came in, I would hand them flowers and candy, and I'd kiss them on the cheek, and I'd go, I love you. And then a cowboy would escort them to the table. It was the sweetest thing, just unbelievable. But I was nervous about Crystal, because we've still only got good morning, Pastor. And I don't know what that reaction is going to be. So she's probably number 35 out of 50, and so the door opens, and she's standing there, and I'm about from me to this gentleman from her. And she looks at me and stops for a minute, and I look at her. I take a step toward her. She steps to me. I hand her some flowers and candy. I lean over and kiss her on the cheek, and I go, I love you. She jumped in my arms, literally wrapped arms and legs around me, started kissing me all over the head, going, I love you, I love you, I love you. I said, somebody get this woman off me. So they take her to the table. We have dinner. It's beautiful. We go back over to the ranch house, and we're sitting around. We have some worship time. People are sharing, and Crystal stands up. She goes, I need to say something. Now, you remember, it's been years and years and years since Caroline, the first young lady, walked down the aisle and said, I've been hooking and stripping 14 years. Yeah. Years and years and years ago, we said yes. And we've said yes for years and years and years. And we said yes when they asked if Crystal could come. So she said, I need to say something. She said, when I got here, I didn't believe anything anybody had to say. My whole life has been one lie. And she said, I kept hearing in the sanctuary on Sundays, y'all talking about this Heavenly Father who loves me. And she said, the only father I've ever known abused me and sold me. And she goes, I didn't believe there was a Heavenly Father. And if there was, I certainly didn't believe He loved me. She said, but y'all just kept loving me and saying yes to me over and over and over. And she said, and I felt things starting to happen. And she said, this week's been incredible. She said, but I'm still having a hard time wrapping my arms and my heart around everything. She said, so about an hour before dinner, I went over to that great big tree by the dining hall and I sat down. And she said, I said, okay, God, if you're really there, I want to make a deal. She said, they keep telling me that you love me and that you care about me and that you don't want anything from me. You just want me to love you back. And she said, so here's what I want. If you're real and if you love me, I want a man to look at me and say he loves me, that I know wants nothing from me. And she said, and if you don't mind, I want that man to remind me of Pastor Bruce. She said, an hour later, I opened the door. And it wasn't somebody that reminded me of Pastor Bruce. It was Pastor Bruce. And he looked at me and he said, I love you. And I know he wants nothing from me. And she said, now I know there is a God. And I know He loves me. I'm 61 years old. Been doing this work 25 years. I believe tomorrow God's going to ask me again to do something that stretches me. And I commit in front of you tonight, when He asks me, we'll say yes. And I challenge you, when He invites you, say yes.
Oh, yes.